What really happens inside a fearful avoidance mind when you go silent? Do they finally realize what they lost, or do they just move on like nothing happened? Most people think silence is a power move, a way to make someone miss you. But when it comes to a fearful avoidant, silence doesn't just make them miss you, it activates them, because silence is not empty for them, it's loud. It echoes with every fear they've buried, every abandonment they've tried to forget. See, fearful avoidants carry two conflicting desires. They crave closeness, yet fear it at the same time. They want connection, but the moment they feel emotionally unsafe, they pull back, fast. So when you suddenly go silent, it triggers both sides of their internal wall. At first they might act detached, posting online, ignoring your messages, even telling themselves, "I knew this would happen." But deep down something else begins to unravel. That silence feels familiar, not comforting, but recognizable. It takes them back to the emotional chaos they felt in early relationships, where love always came with fear, and peace always came after distance. And that's what makes your silence so powerful. It forces them to face something they've avoided all along, their dependency on emotional reassurance. Because even though fearful avoidants seem independent, they've often relied on you to regulate their feelings, your tone, your presence, your warmth. Without it, their emotional system starts to collapse on itself. They replay conversations in their mind. They wonder if they said something wrong, or if you've finally seen through them. And slowly, the silence starts to whisper the one thing they feared the most. You've lost someone who truly understood you. But that's just the beginning, because the fearful avoidant doesn't react all at once. They unravel day by day. Each stage reveals a different side of their internal storm, from denial, to longing, to regret. In this video we'll break down exactly what happens in their mind, day by day, when you go silent, and how understanding this cycle can help you stop chasing, start healing, and finally take back your emotional power. Day 1. The shock response. At first it's not heartbreak, it's relief. That silence doesn't feel like loss. It feels like oxygen after emotional overload. For the fearful avoidant, relationships are like walking a tightrope. One wrong emotional move, and they fear falling into rejection or control. So when you suddenly step back, their system exhales. Finally their inner voice whispers, "I can breathe again." They tell themselves it's better this way. They start replaying justifications. They were too intense. I needed space. This is for the best. But underneath those thoughts isn't peace, it's shock. Their body is still scanning for your energy, your messages, your tone, the emotional rhythm that used to steady them. Without it, their nervous system feels both free and unanchored. During the first few hours, they'll distract themselves. Music, social media, work, anything that fills the silence. But distraction doesn't erase the echo. They'll glance at their phone without realizing, check the time more often, scroll a little too long. Because here's what most people miss. Fearful avoidants don't miss you immediately. They miss the regulation you provided. You were the emotional temperature they subconsciously relied on to know how close or far they could be. Now with that gone, their mind starts glitching between two realities. One part says, "Good, I'm in control again." The other whispers, "Wait, why does this feel wrong?" That's when the cracks begin. By night the silence doesn't feel freeing anymore, it feels like static. Their thoughts start looping. Did I overreact? Were they really that bad? Why does it feel empty even though I wanted this? Still pride steps in. They won't reach out. Not yet. Because breaking silence would mean admitting they care. And that's the very vulnerability they're terrified of. So instead they project calm while privately spiraling. They post something detached, something that subtly says, "I'm fine," but deep down they're testing, will you notice? Will you react? By the end of day 1 they haven't processed loss. They've entered emotional withdrawal. It's not missing you. It's missing the illusion of safety they had when you were emotionally available. The silence you created has started doing what words never could. It's making them face the emptiness behind their control. By day 2 the initial shock starts to fade, and something new takes over. Ego. The fearful avoidant brain hates uncertainty. So instead of sitting in confusion, it starts rewriting the story, not for truth, but for control. They tell themselves, "I knew this would happen. They always leave. I'm better off this way." This is the ego defense, a psychological shield designed to protect them from shame and rejection, because deep down they don't believe they were enough to be chosen or stayed for. So they flip the narrative. You become the unpredictable one, you become the emotionally unstable one, you become the reason they had to pull away. It's a self-soothing illusion, fragile, but necessary. They start intellectualizing everything. They'll analyze your last words, your tone, your silence, turning every detail into proof that they were right about you all along. But here's the twist, this overthinking isn't about you, it's about calming the chaos inside. They're trying to rebuild emotional order through logic, something they can control. Outwardly, they look composed, even indifferent. They might post something subtle online, maybe a quote or story meant to suggest they're unbothered. But those posts aren't confidence, they're emotional smoke signals. See, I'm fine, I'm winning this. Privately though, they keep replaying moments in their mind. They'll think about your laugh, your messages, your care, then immediately push the thought away, because every memory threatens the wall they're trying to rebuild. At night, the internal conflict intensifies. Half of them misses the safety of your emotional presence, the other half clings to independence like oxygen. It's the push-pull in full motion, wanting love but fearing need. By the end of day 2, the fearful avoidant convinces themselves they've regained power. They'll say, "I'm over it," and almost believe it. But their calm isn't peace, it's armor, because deep down, the silence is still echoing. And beneath all that logic and pride, they're quietly waiting for you to break it first. By day 3, the facade begins to crumble. The cool detachment, the "I'm fine" energy, it starts to lose its grip. Because silence by now isn't just space, it's absence, and absence has weight. The fearful avoidant who once found relief in distance begins to feel something they've been avoiding all along, emotional withdrawal. It's not about you texting or calling anymore, it's about the nervous system realizing that the emotional regulation you once provided is gone. See, when you were present, your voice, your empathy, your patience, it unconsciously kept them balanced. Even when they pushed you away, your emotional consistency gave them a sense of safety. But now that energy is missing, and their system starts to destabilize, they might wake up feeling anxious for no reason, their chest tight, thoughts racing. They'll check their phone more often, not because they plan to message you, but because part of them is expecting you to. And when there's nothing, the silence starts to feel loud. They try to distract themselves, binge content, scroll endlessly, dive into work or casual interactions, but the distractions don't land like before. Everything feels hollow because your emotional presence used to fill that invisible space they now feel inside. Here's the truth. Fearful avoidants aren't good at being with their emotions. They swing between numbing and flooding. Either they feel nothing or everything, and around day 3, that pendulum swings hard. They might replay arguments or imagine conversations in their head, not to find closure, but to regulate their emotions through fantasy. It's their mind's way of trying to recreate the connection they lost, but it doesn't work, and the tension builds. By evening, confusion turns into longing. They start missing the warmth, the empathy, the grounding that came from being seen by you. Yet reaching out feels dangerous, because it would mean admitting they care, and for a fearful avoidant, vulnerability feels like exposure, so instead they collapse inward. They'll isolate, overthink, maybe even self-sabotage to prove they're still in control, but internally, they're unraveling. The calm exterior hides an emotional storm, a mix of regret, fear, and yearning they don't know how to process. By the end of day 3, the emotional crash is real. They're no longer running from you, they're running from themselves. And silence has done what words never could. It made them feel their own emptiness. By days 4 and 5, something subtle but powerful begins to shift inside the fearful avoidant. The chaos of the first few days, the denial, the rationalizing, the emotional crash, starts to quiet down, but that silence doesn't bring peace, it brings awareness. At this point, the avoidant's nervous system is tired. They've tried everything, distraction, logic, emotional numbing, but nothing truly restores balance. So their mind starts drifting back to you, not out of control but out of longing. The avoidance begins to soften. They replay conversations, remember your tone, your laugh, the way you understood them without needing explanations. What once felt like too much now feels like home. This is when they start quietly checking your energy, not necessarily reaching out, but watching. They visit your social media, scroll through old texts, linger on old pictures. It's not about curiosity, it's about connection. They're trying to feel your presence without having to risk vulnerability. In their mind, your silence becomes a mirror, and it reflects back everything they've been running from. They start to question their choices. Did I push away someone who truly cared? Why do I always destroy what feels safe? Why can't I just handle closeness like normal people? It's not guilt at first, it's recognition. For the first time, they begin to realize that your absence isn't punishment, it's reflection. They see how much emotional grounding you brought, how their avoidance patterns kept them from receiving real love, but there's also fear, because with that awareness comes vulnerability, the very feeling they've spent years protecting themselves from. So instead of reaching out, many avoidants hover in the shadows of their own indecision. They'll think about texting you, even type a message, but delete it before sending. It's not pride anymore, it's fear of exposure, fear that if they reach out and you don't respond, it'll confirm their worst belief. I'm unworthy of love. By day 5, they're emotionally torn, caught between the comfort of solitude and the ache of genuine loss. Your silence has become a mirror, forcing them to confront their emotional patterns without distraction, and whether they admit it or not, something inside them has shifted, because now it's not about you leaving, it's about what that silence revealed. The depth of their attachment, the pain of their own walls, and the quiet realization that maybe this time, they lost something real. By day 6 or 7, the fearful avoidant is no longer in denial, they're in conflict. The silence that once gave them relief has now turned into emotional pressure. Every distraction, every rational thought, every attempt to move on starts to collapse under the weight of one simple truth: they miss you. But admitting that feels impossible. Because for the fearful avoidant, vulnerability is a double-edged sword. The very thing they crave is also the thing they fear most, so they live these days in a state of emotional whiplash, one moment ready to reach out, the next retreating into self-protection. Inside, their thoughts sound like a tug-of-war. I should text them. No, what if they ignore me? But what if they've already moved on? They probably don't even care anymore. Each side of that internal dialogue fights for dominance, their heart longing for reconnection, their fear clinging to control, and that's exactly what the vulnerability war looks like, a constant push and pull between desire and defense. They start overanalyzing every possible outcome. They might rewatch your old stories, check your online status, or even create fake scenarios in their head, imagining what you'd say if they reached out. But when they finally pick up the phone, their thumb hovers over the screen, paralyzed, not because they don't want to talk, but because silence feels safer than rejection. What makes this stage so painful is that their emotional walls are no longer protecting them, they're isolating them, and deep down they know it. The quiet that once gave them control now feels like punishment. They start realizing that by avoiding pain, they've also avoided love. Sometimes in this stage you'll see indirect attempts to reconnect, a random like on an old post, a vague story meant for you to see, or a subtle comment. It's their way of testing the water without fully diving in. They want to feel your energy, but not risk their pride. By the end of day 7, exhaustion sets in. The war between their heart and ego has drained them. They start to understand that silence isn't just your absence, it's a reflection of what their own defenses cost them. They're finally confronting the hardest truth of all, that love requires risk, and without vulnerability, connection can't survive. For some, this is the moment they break the silence, reaching out in a hesitant, carefully worded message. For others, they pull back deeper into isolation, hoping time will numb what emotion has exposed. Either way, by day 7, something inside them has shifted permanently. They may still be silent on the outside, but internally, the walls are cracking. And in that quiet collapse, the fearful avoidant faces the one emotion they've avoided all along: regret. By day 8 or 9, the fearful avoidant reaches a breaking point, but not the one you expect. They're not ready to pour their heart out, but they also can't stand the emptiness anymore. So instead of genuine vulnerability, what you'll often see next is a test. This is the stage of emotional breadcrumbs. A random like on your post, a meme that seems oddly specific, a text that says, "Hey, just checking if you're okay," casual on the surface, but loaded with meaning underneath. They're testing to see if the door is still open, if you'll respond, if they still matter. This indirect communication is their way of controlling connection. They want to reconnect, but only on safe terms, without the risk of rejection. So instead of saying, "I miss you," they'll say something neutral, hoping you'll fill in the emotional blanks. But for some fearful avoidants, the turning point looks different. Instead of reaching out, they retreat completely. This usually happens when the silence triggers too much vulnerability, when their fear of losing control outweighs their longing for you. They convince themselves it's better to disappear than to risk being hurt again. Whether they breadcrumb or withdraw, both paths come from the same internal conflict. They want closeness, but they don't trust it. And your silence has made them face that contradiction, one they can no longer ignore. So the turning point isn't really about you. It's about them, about whether they'll choose fear or growth, and whichever path they take next will define not just the connection, but their emotional evolution beyond it. Here's the truth: your silence was never about control, it was about clarity. When you stopped chasing, fixing, and explaining, you didn't abandon them, you simply stopped abandoning yourself. To a fearful avoidant, silence feels like rejection, but in reality, it's reflection. It forces them to sit with everything they've been avoiding: the fear of being unloved, the guilt of pushing good people away, and the ache of realizing that emotional safety doesn't exist without honesty. Your silence becomes a mirror, not of cruelty, but of truth. It reveals the emotional imbalance that words use to cover, because when you stop talking, their excuses stop working, and in that stillness they finally meet the consequences of their own distance. But here's the key: your silence only becomes powerful when it's rooted in peace, not anger. When it's not about teaching them a lesson, but reclaiming your energy. That's where true strength lies, not in withdrawal as punishment, but in self-respect as protection. You're not going silent to manipulate. You're going silent to reset the dynamic, to remind both of you that love cannot thrive in chasing or control. So if they come back, let their actions speak, and if they don't, know that your silence already did. Because sometimes the most healing thing you can ever say to an avoidant is nothing at all, and let the echo of your absence remind them what real presence once felt like.